Okay, good morning, welcome. So today I want to do Pesach, and we'll mix it with the Parsha as well, actually. Um, but I want to spend some time on Pesach this week, and I think we'll have Shiur next week as well, and next week will be our last Shiur before break. We'll see how my schedule goes, but I'm planning on a Shiur for next week also. Okay, so I want to start off with a famous question about Pesach from Levi Yitzchak Barditchev, the Kedushas Levi. And he asks a fascinating question, and that is that we notice the way that we refer to the Yom Tov that's coming up is we refer to it as Pesach. That's how we always refer to it. But what's interesting is the Torah does not refer to it as Pesach. The Torah refers to it as Chag HaMatzos. So the Kedushas Levi asks, why is it? Why is it that when we talk about the Yom Tov amongst ourselves, we use the word Pesach? And when the Torah refers to the Yom Tov, when Hashem refers to the Yom Tov, he refers to it as Chag HaMatzos. So, but we don't call it Chag HaMatzos. I mean, we understand that that's the name for Pesach, but you never hear somebody saying, where are you going for Chag HaMatzos? You staying home for Chag HaMatzos? You're going away for Chag HaMatzos? We say Pesach. So that's the Kedushas Levi's question. The Torah calls it Chag HaMatzos, and Hashem calls it Chag HaMatzos. Why do we call it Pesach? That's question number one. Question number two from the Sfas Emes. And the Sfas Emes says, he asks also a very good question. And he's talking about the minhag of beer chametz, bedikas chametz and beer chametz. We know Erev Pesach, the night before, we search our homes. We find the 10 pieces of chametz. We use most people use a feather in a bag, and they put the chametz into the bag. And the minhag is that we search with a candle, the or haner, right? We search with the candle. And the minhag Yisrael is that when the search is done, when the chametz is all in the bag, we put the spoon, the feather, and the candle all in the bag. We tie it up, and that's the bundle that we throw into the beer chametz at the Teaneck Jewish Center in the parking lot there. We go to the big communal beer chametz, and we throw the bag together with the spoon, the feather, and the candle. And that's minhag Yisrael. And the Sfas Emes asks a very good question. He says, I understand why the feather and the spoon are burned because they touch chametz, right? You use the feather to put the chametz onto the spoon, and you put it into the bag. So the feather and the spoon touch the chametz. But asks the Sfas Emes, why do we burn the candle? Why do we put the candle in the bag and burn the candle? The candle never touched chametz. The candle was just our flashlight. So why is it minhag Yisrael? Again, it's not a halacha to burn the candle, but it is minhag Yisrael. Why is it minhag Yisrael to burn the candle? Okay. So those are our two questions. Why do we call the Yom Tov Pesach and Hashem calls it Chag HaMatzos? And why by beer chametz do we burn the candle? And as we'll see, even though this question is the Kedushas Levi and this question is the Sfas Emes, but both of these questions have the same sort of underlying answer. And this is a theme that absolutely runs through Pesach and is also a theme of an element of our Parsha as well. There's a reason why these Parshias of Vayakhel, Pikudei, we always read before Pesach, usually in the days between Purim and Pesach, like this year. So obviously, these are Parshas that prepare us for the Yom Tov. Seemingly, Parshas Vayakhel and Pikudei, this week is Pikudei, is just about the details of the Mishkan. So what does that have to do with Pesach? So this is what I want to speak about today. So in the very last aliyah of this week's Parsha, Parshas Pikudei, the very last aliyah, this is now Hashem has commanded Moshe Rabbeinu in Truman Tetzava all the details of the building of the Mishkan and the Big Day Kahuna, and in Vayakhel Pikudei is Moshe Rabbeinu telling the Jews exactly what Hashem told them in Truman Tetzava. And so, but at the very end of Parshas Pikudei, in the last aliyah, Moshe Rabbeinu, this is the ending of the putting together of the Mishkan, And Moshe Rabbeinu places all of the kalim in the right place, and one of the kalim is the kiyor. That Moshe Rabbeinu tells us the kiyor is the washing station where the Kohanim, in order to come into the Mishkan, in order to serve in the Mishkan, they have to be in a state of tahara. And so symbolically, they wash their hands, they wash their feet, which puts them into the state of tahara that they could now come in and serve in the Mishkan. And so the kiyor is this washing station. It's spoken about in last week's Parsha, Parsha Vayakhel, and in this week's Parsha, the very end, where Moshe Rabbeinu places it in the right place, and then that concludes the building of the Mishkan. So I want to speak about that kiyor, that washing station, for a moment, because the kiyor itself has a fascinating backstory to it. And it's not really elucidated so much in this parsha, but it was in last week's parsha, where the kiyor, where Moshe introduces the kiyor to Klal Yisrael, and everybody brings, as we know, what was the Mishkan built with? It was built with the nadavas, the donations of Klal Yisrael that they brought, their gold, their jewelry, their wool, and all of these elements of that the Mishkan was made out of were donations from the Jewish people in order to build this house of Hashem, this dwelling place for Hashem, the Mishkan. And one of the things that were donated were mirrors. And these mirrors eventually became the kiyor. It's what the kiyor was made out of. But there's a beautiful and just fascinating Rashi in last week's parsha about the kiyor. And Rashi speaks there about a discussion, actually a difference of opinion between Moshe Rabbeinu and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because when the women initially brought these mirrors, and these were the mirrors that they would utilize to make themselves up, to put on their makeup, to put on their jewelry, to beautify themselves. And Moshe rejected these mirrors, felt that they had no place in the Mishkan, no place in the Beis Hashem. He rejected these mirrors. Why did he reject the mirrors? So says Rashi, he rejected the mirrors because they were utilized for the Yetzer Hara, in order for the women to beautify themselves, to arouse their husbands to desire them. That's the simple pshat. And Moshe Rabbeinu rejects them. He figures a mirror that's used for taiva, for Yetzer Hara, that's not appropriate in the Beis Hashem. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, no, that's incorrect. Not only does Hashem say, Kibel, you should receive these mirrors. You absolutely should take these mirrors, and they should absolutely be part of the Mishkan. But Hashem goes one step further. And he says, from all of the donations that Klal Yisrael donates to the Mishkan, from all the donations, from the gold, from the silver, from the jewelry, from the sheep, from the wools, from the dyes, everything, that these mirrors are more beloved to me than any other donation. The exact opposite of Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu rejects them because he feels they have some kind of they're tainted with some kind of underlying negativity. They're utilized for the Yetzer Hara, whatever that means. And Hashem tells him, not only kibel, not only receive them, but these are more beloved to me than any other donation at all. And the question is, why does Moshe Rabbeinu reject them? What does that mean, that they were utilized for the Yetzer Hara? What exactly does that mean? But what's even more interesting is Rashi details exactly how those mirrors were used. In this Rashi, where he discusses this whole conversation between Moshe Rabbeinu and Hashem about the mirrors, Moshe Rabbeinu rejects them. Hashem says, Kibel, receive them. And not only that, they're more beloved to me than anything else. But then Rashi continues. How exactly were these mirrors used, says Rashi. And Rashi says that when the men, with their backbreaking labor and their slavery in Mitzrayim, were exhausted, so the women would come out at the end of the day and would bring them food and drink And the women would beautify themselves in order to seduce their husbands. And then Rashi says when they would get there and they would feed their husbands, they would then look into the mirrors together with their husbands. And as together they both looked into the mirrors, the women would say to their husbands, Ani yafa mimcha, says Rashi. Ani yafa mimcha. I am more beautiful than you. Ani yafa mimcha, the woman would say to their husbands. And those would be seductive words, says Rashi. And with those words, they would seduce their husbands. They would become intimate. They would be intimate, and the women become impregnated. And that is how they established legions and legions of Jewish children in Mitzrayim. That's the end of Rashi. So the questions that we have is, what exactly, number one, why did Moshe reject the mirrors? What does it mean they were used for the Yetzer Hara? What exactly does that mean? And number two, what does it mean when the women would look into the mirrors and say to their husbands those three words, Ani yafa mimcha, I am more beautiful than you? Those don't seem to be seductive words. Somehow Rashi says those are the words that the woman would use to seduce their husband, but what's seductive about Ani yafa mimcha? I am more beautiful than you. So in order to understand this, and then we're going to connect it back to Pesach as well, but in order to understand this, we have to preface with one of the most important midos, important character attributes that a human being should strive and work to obtain. And there's lots of different positive attributes that we have to strive for. But probably one of the most important, one of the foundational character traits that a human being should try to imbue within themselves is the midah of anava, humility, being humble. And in a very real way, humility is the glue in relationships, in all relationships. And this, we don't have to look into the deep into the holy books to understand this. We just have to think about our own lives. Like we all know, and we've all come across people who are imbued with tremendous ego. These are the people who they have all the answers. They're never wrong. They're always right. They know everything. There's no room for discussion with them. There's no room for constructive criticism to them. They don't take criticism at all well. And we all know these kinds of people. They have an opinion about everything. They're always right about everything. They're never wrong. And we know just from our own life and our own personal experiences that it is very difficult to have a relationship with these kind of people. And oftentimes, these kind of people simply just repel us. Ego repels people. But you know what attracts people? You know what attracts us? When we come across somebody who's naturally humble. Somebody who has humility. That's attractive to us. We're attracted to that. That's just human nature. Ego repels us, and humility attracts us. And this is because Hashem works the same way. The Gemara says that Hashem is everywhere. Leis aser panav mine, says the Zohar. There's no place that's void of him. And yet the Gemara says there's one place. Hashem himself says, I cannot be in that place. I am not in that place. What place is that? Says the Gemara, in a place with a person with ego. Hashem says, Ein ani v'hu yachol lider b'machem echad. He and I cannot dwell in the same place. Ego doesn't just repel us. Ego repels the Shekhinah. Ego repels Hashem. And likewise, bittul, humility, anava, anivos, that attracts the Shekhinah. That attracts Hashem. And it works that way in relationships because it works that way spiritually. We are all at Tselem Elokim. So the godliness within us is repelled by ego and attracted by humility. So if we know this, and we all sort of understand this, and ego is a part of our nature, we were created with ego, and it's meant to be, and we're meant to have ego, but it's meant to be channeled properly. So the question is, what is our actual work in terms of creating this humility within ourselves and trying to increase the humility within ourselves? What's our mindset? What do we have to do in order to achieve this, in order to bring ourselves more humility and less ego? So there's basically one of two ways that we can go about doing this, about becoming more humble. I mean, truly becoming more humble. So one way of going about this is focusing on doing a real self-evaluation with real honesty and self-awareness, which in and of itself is rare. It's hard to have real self-awareness. Self-awareness, like common sense, it's not so common. A lot of times we go through life with a certain, with blinders on when it comes to certainly the negative parts of ourselves. So one way is to, with real self-awareness, make a real self-calculation, if you will. Look into the mirror and make a real calculation of where exactly are all my flaws, where exactly are all my negatives. And if I make a real self-evaluation and I'm truly honest with myself, I'll have a list of negatives. None of us are perfect. We all have qualities that need improvement. And the more I focus on those qualities that need improvement, the more I focus on the negatives, the more humble I become. So that's one way of becoming humble, focusing on the negatives. But there's a problem with that way. There's several problems with that way. One problem with that is the Alter Rebbe addresses this in chapter 1 of Tanya, that I'll get dejected from this. I'll just become depressed and dejected. And I'll if I think of myself as being lowly, there's either one of two results of that. Either one, I'll get dejected and depressed, or I won't even care that I'm lonely. I'll be so numb from the fact that I have all these negatives that I'll begin not to care about them, because after all, this is this is who I am. I can't help my anger issues, my sad issues, my taiva issues, whatever it may be. But the more so one destructive element of focusing on our flaws is that it makes us dejected. And we have to be Ivdos Hashem b'simcha. We have to serve Hashem b'simcha. But even worse than that is that when I focus on my flaws, when that's where my consciousness is, when that's where my mind is, then I don't only see my flaws, but I start focusing on your flaws also, right? Because that's where my mindset is. If I'm focused and I'm deeply sensitive to my own negativities, and that's where my focus lies, then I start seeing those negativities in other people as well. I start seeing their negativities. So, there's a pasuk in Mishlei, Kamayim Panim El Panim, that the mirror, the water that you look into reflects the exact face that you show to it. Right? The mirror reflects the energy that's being shown to it. Similarly, Kamayim Panim El Panim, that human beings have that nature as well, that we reflect back the energy that's reflected to us. So in other words, if somebody approaches us with love and is incredibly loving and warm and embracing to us, automatically we reflect that emotion back. Somebody who's loving to us, we feel that love as well. Likewise, when someone's angry with us, nasty with us, yells at us, whatever it may be, we reflect that energy as well. Combine Panim El Panim. So if I start seeing the negatives in myself, I start seeing the negatives in you, then you'll see the negatives in me as well. It doesn't create a very positive chain in terms of relationships. So there's a better way to achieve real anivos, rather than focusing on my negative qualities. The other way of achieving anivos is looking at everybody else and seeing the greatness and the beauty and the positive qualities in others. And seeing, when I see how others have these incredible qualities, because every human being has positive and negative. And it's up to us where we choose to focus. I could choose to focus on the positive. I could choose to focus on the negative. If I focus on the positive in others versus the negatives in myself that we spoke about before, but if I focus on the positives in others and I see the beauty in others and I recognize the greatness in others, then that instills humility with me. I want to have that greatness. I recognize that others have qualities that I have not yet achieved, that others have a certain beauty and a certain splendor that I'm working towards, and that itself makes me humble. The fact that others have this greatness. So when I see the greatness in others, again, it's kamayim panim el panim. When I reflect that energy to others, then what do they tend to do? See the milas in me, see the greatness in me as well. And this is how the pasuk actually tells us in Parshas Ba'aleischa. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu, the pasuk tells us in Ba'aleischa, Va'ish Moshe anav ma'od mikol adam asher al pnei adama, says the pasuk, that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble human being. Ish Moshe anav ma'od, he was incredibly humble. Mikol adam asher al pnei adama, more than any other human being on the face of the earth. Moshe had incredible humility. How did Moshe obtain this humility? So if we read this pasuk a little bit differently, the pasuk actually tells us how. Va'ish Moshe anav ma'od, period. Moshe was an incredible anav. From where did Moshe achieve this anivos? From where did Moshe Rabbeinu get his humility? Mikol ha'adam asher al pnei ha'adama, by looking at the positive qualities mikol ha'adam, of every other human being. Now, there was nobody greater than Moshe Rabbeinu. And being humble doesn't mean I'm a doormat, I'm a shmata, I'm worthless, I'm nothing. That's not humility. Moshe Rabbeinu knew exactly who he was. He knew exactly the positive traits that HaKadosh Baruch Hu imbued him with. And yet, with everything that Moshe Rabbeinu was, perhaps the greatest Jew, the greatest teacher that the Jewish people have ever seen, have ever known, with everything that he was able to see the godless in others, the greatness in others. And he felt, had Hashem given others the gifts that he gave me, they would have been even greater than me. Moshe Rabbeinu looked at every other person, Mikol Adam Asher Al Pnei Adama, and from there he achieved the nivus. This is the better path. Rather than focusing on the negatives in myself, which will in turn empower me to see the negatives in others, I focus on the positives, on the greatness, on the godless, on the splendor, on the beauty of others, and I strive to achieve that. That's where I get humility from. That's the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu. And as much as this applies in relationships in general, it applies in our marriages even more. It applies in our marriages even more, because the galoo in marriage, just as ego repels relationships, it repels relationships in marriage as well. Because in marriage, you have two total opposites, ish v'isha, two total opposites, ish v'isha, male and female energy. These are not parallel energies, these are total opposite energies in so many ways, which I don't have to enumerate. We all understand the male and female energy are so different. So how is it possible for a male and female to come together in a long-term, monogamous, unified, happy relationship when their energies are so different? So if each one comes into a relationship with ego, meaning with ego stresses, my energy is the correct energy. My opinion is the correct opinion. If each one comes into the relationship like that, then we're destined to have constant conflict. The only way that the male-female dynamic can actually work in any kind of long-term relationship where both are ultimately happy and satisfied is if both subdue that ego and make room to see things from the perspective, not only a different perspective, but an opposite perspective. And when we can do that, that's real anivos, that's humility. And that's ultimately the glue that holds the marriage together. So that means that we have to achieve this in our own relationships in the same way that Moshe Rabbeinu achieved it, in the same way that we were speaking about before, path number two, by looking at the positive qualities of my spouse, by focusing my mind on those positive qualities. And in a very real way, this is a transcendence of our nature. Because human nature is that no matter what we have in life, forget about relationships for a second, no matter what we have in life, I have a home, I have a car, I have food in my fridge, I have a roof over my head, but I don't focus on that. I focus on what I'm lacking. I need a bigger home. My house is falling apart, needs a handyman. My car is 11 years old, has 150,000 miles on it. I need a new. We always tend to focus. This is our nature, not on what we have, but on what we're lacking. And the same thing in our marriages. Oftentimes, it just becomes nature to take for granted the positive qualities that my spouse brings to the table and focus and put my mind on the negative qualities, the negative attributes that drive me crazy. So this is the response. This is the answer. The answer to that is that we have to do the exact opposite. If we are going to develop real humility in our relationship, in our spousal relationship, which is the most important relationship in our lives, it comes from focusing and setting my mind and placing my eye and my mind's eye on all of the positive qualities that my spouse has. And when I see those positive qualities, I'm humbled that Hashem gave me as a spouse somebody with such positive qualities. And this is why, just parenthetically, I'm going to throw in a parenthetical here. And I think I've spoken about this before, and many years ago. But one of the ways, and the actual way that we affect kedushin today, is through the husband giving the wife a ring under the chuppah, right? And he says, "Hariat nekudeshesli b'tabasa," right? You are betrothed to me with this ring, das Moshe Yisrael. And when he gives her that ring in front of two witnesses, at that moment, the couple is married. That's what actually legally affects the marriage, brings about the marriage. Where do we learn that from? Where do we learn that through the chassan giving kesef, giving a financial gift to the kala, that actually affects the kinyan of marriage? And fascinatingly enough, we learn this, says the Talmud, we learn this from Avram Avinu's purchase of Maras HaMachpelah. How do we learn it from there? It's a gezerah shava. Oftentimes, when the same Hebrew word is used in two different places, there is a connection between the two. So with husband and wife, it says in Parshas Kiseitze, "Vayikach ish isha," when a man will take a wife in marriage, and it uses the word vayikach, take, the Hebrew word to take. And by Maras HaMachpelah, when Avram Avinu gives the money to Ephron Achiti, to Ephron to purchase this cave on the end of the field there, he says, "Here is the kesef. I'm giving you the money. Kach mimeni, take it from me." So kach, take, and vayikach, take. Vayikach ishisha is the same Hebrew word. So says the Talmud, we have an oral tradition going back all the way to Sinai that these two are connected. Just like Avram Avinu was able to purchase and affected the kinyan, affected the purchase of the legally transferred the status of the field from Ephron's to his through kesef. So too, kesef from vikach is how vikach ish isha. One of the ways that a man could take a wife legally is through giving her kesef, through giving her a gift of money. So, and again, we learn that from Avram Avinu giving the money to Ephron Achiti in the purchase of Maras HaMachpelah, and he says kach mimeni, and it says there vayikach ish isha. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. But if you think about it for even a moment, it seems so counterintuitive, if not bizarre, because we learn about marriage. Vayikach ish isha, when a man takes a woman to as a wife, that's marriage. We're learning about marriage from where? From the burial of Sarah, from the end of Avram Avinu's marriage. That's the dissolving of his marriage. He's burying his wife. That's the end of the marriage. Why would we learn? That's number one. Number two, why would we learn marriage which is the happiest occasion in our lives, from burial, which is the saddest occasion of our lives. Right? A husband burying a wife. So it seems so counterintuitive that we learn about the laws of marriage through Avram Avinu purchasing a burial plot for his wife. That seems to make no sense whatsoever. So I saw a beautiful explanation that actually there's a very deep reason and a very deep connection between the two events. And that is as follows, that when Avram Avinu purchased that cave, in general, when any two people make a business transaction, the idea is that each side feels that they got the better deal. Otherwise, they wouldn't do the transaction. So imagine Ephron Achiti. He's selling a cave at the end of his field. Now, a cave is worthless real estate. What can you do with a cave? It's a burial plot, basically. Can't really use it for anything else. And it's at the end of his field. And he sold it for what would be the equivalent today. Somebody told me that the equivalent today was hundreds of millions of dollars. It was a huge amount of money at the time. Huge amount, enormous amount of money. So Ephron comes home to his wife, Mrs. Ephron, and we can only imagine the conversation. He tells his wife, Mrs. Ephron, you'll never imagine the Jews are supposed to be good at business. They're supposed to be financially sound. Boy, did I get the better of Avram today. That for a worthless cave at the end of my field, we're rich. I sold it for hundreds of millions of dollars for all of this silver. Ephron absolutely thought he got the better of the deal. But imagine what Avram Avinu thought. The actual first purchase of Eretz Yisrael, the land that Hashem promised him to his progeny. And now he begins the actual first acquisition of that holy land. And in addition to that, he purchased the burial place of Adam and Chava. This is priceless. This is worth more than any amount of money in the world. So there's no question that Avram Avinu felt he got the better of the deal. So each one of them walked away thinking, wow, did I get the better deal? And that's why we learn marriage from the purchase of Maras HaMachpelah. Because if we want this marriage to be successful, to thrive, then the only way that's going to happen is if each one is able to focus on the long term, on the positive qualities of their spouse. If each one feels, I got the better deal. Look at the incredible blessings that Hashem blessed me with. Look at the incredible wife that Hashem blessed me with all of her amazing qualities, well beyond anything I deserve. So if I affect my humility, if I affect my own humility by focusing on the positive qualities of my spouse, by focusing on the beauty, on the splendor, on everything they bring to the table, on everything they bring to my lives, and I don't focus on the negative qualities, that's how the marriage is successful. That's why we learn marriage from Maras HaMachpelah. Now, let's bring it back to the mirrors, and then we'll bring it back to Pesach. So when the women looked in these mirrors, they said, Ani yafa mimcha. They said to their husbands, I am more beautiful than you. How is, and that's with that they seduced their husbands, says Rashi. It doesn't make any sense. Those aren't seductive words. So what Rashi means is something else. We have to read that Ani yafa mimcha a little bit differently. And that is that these women, Moshe Rabbeinu rejected the mirrors initially because he said, but why? Because it was utilized for the Eitzar. What does that mean? It means that Moshe, it doesn't mean that they how everybody learns it, that, well, they utilize it to beautify themselves and to arouse their husbands to taiva, to desire, and with that they seduce their husbands. And but why is that a Yetzirah? For a woman to seduce her husband is not a Yetzirah, it's a Yetzer Tov, it's not a Yetzirah. Why would Rashi say that's a Yetzirah? That's not what Rashi means. What Rashi means is Moshe Rabbeinu felt that the women utilized those mirrors as women often utilize mirrors to find their flaws and to look at their negativities and to look at what needs to be improved in their physical appearance. And they weren't pleased with their physical appearance. That's the Yetzer Hara that tells you you're not beautiful enough, you're not pretty enough, you're flawed. That's your Yetzer Hara. And Moshe Rabbeinu felt that's why the mirrors were used. And Hashem says, no, they weren't used for that. To the contrary, when they looked at those mirrors with their husbands, they said the three words, Ani Yafa Mimcha. Read it differently, not I am more beautiful than you, but Ani Yafa. The women looked in those mirrors and they said to their husbands, I am beautiful. They saw their own beauty. You know how I know I'm beautiful? You know why I look in the mirror and I say those words, Ani Yafa? I know that I'm beautiful. I know that Ani Yafa from where? Mimcha, from you, from my husband. Because you've told me I'm beautiful. Because you speak about how much you love me. Because you speak about my beauty. Because you tell me constantly I'm beautiful. That's how I know I'm beautiful. And so the women would look into the mirrors with their husbands at the end of this long day of Avodas Perech. And they would say to their husbands, you may be tired, you may be exhausted, but Ani Yafa, you have shown me throughout my life, throughout our marriage, that Ani Yafa, that I am beautiful. And I know that, Mimcha, I know it from you, because that's what you see in me. And that's what you tell me, and that's what you show me. And those are words of seduction. And that's why Hashem says, from all of the donations of the Mishkan, the one that that is the most beautiful to me, the one that I desire the most, are those mirrors. That's what Hashem loves. When each side of the marriage focuses on the positives of the other. When the husband is so effusive in his love and how beautiful his wife is, that his wife looks in the mirror and she sees her own beauty, Ani Yafa, from where? Mimcha, from her husband, from you. That's what Hashem loves more than anything else. And this relationship, that's the lesson of the kiyor. And that's why the kiyor was used as the washing station, as the Kohanim. This is what brings us to Tahara. Today we don't have the Mishkan. Today, our Mishkan is our homes. Our homes are our Mishkan. Our tables are our Mizbeach. So we have to create this in our homes. This is the story of the Mishkan. The Kohanim achieved Tahara through this kiyor. This is how we bring Tahara. We bring purity. We bring beauty. We bring splendor. We bring Hashem into our home. This is how we make our homes the Mishkan. Because our relationship with Hashem is this husband-wife relationship. That's the whole Shir HaShirim. And what do we do with Shir HaShirim? At the end of the Seder, we read the whole Shir HaShirim. Many people have the minute to read the whole Shir HaShirim. Why? At the end of the Seder? Because Pesach represents this love affair between Klal Yisrael and the Jewish people. Hashem took us out. We were unworthy. We were in the Mem Teshari Tumah. We were in the 49 gates of impurity. We were sunk into the moral depravity of Mitzrayim. But Hashem loved us. And notwithstanding how negative we may have, how deep we may have fallen into spiritual negativity in Mitzrayim, Hashem sees our beauty. And that's why. Let's go back now to the Kedushas Levi. That's why. The Kedushas Levi asked the question, why do we say Pesach and Hashem says Chag HaMatzos? And the answer is, that we say Pesach because we focus on this Yom Tov, on the greatness of our spouse, on the greatness of Hashem, right? And this Hashem and us is this spousal relationship between Klal Yisrael and the Jewish people. And so we focus on the beauty in Hashem, that Hashem, even though we were unworthy, Hashem was Pesach al Pesach. He passed over the Jewish homes, the Makas B'cheres. He spared us. So we call it Pesach, focusing on the great thing that Hashem did for us. And Hashem calls it Chag HaMatzos, because notwithstanding how lowly we are and how far we sunk spiritually, Hashem focuses on our positive spiritual qualities. That notwithstanding the fact that we were leaving Mitzrayim with no provisions, We were leaving Mitzrayim with no food, no provisions. We had no idea how we're going to survive. We left with simply the matzah on our back. And Hashem says to Yirmiyahu Navi, that's a charti l'cha chesed nerayach. I will always remember the love that the Jewish people had for me. Lechtecha acharai b'midbar. They followed after me in the midbar with no provisions at all except their matzah. So to stress the beauty of his spouse, so to speak, of Klal Yisrael, Hashem calls it Chag HaMatzos to stress our beauty. We call it Chag Pesach, says the Kedushas Levi, to stress Hashem, what Hashem did for us. Each one in the relationship looks at the positive qualities of the other. That's Chag HaMatzos and that's Pesach. Hashem sees our positive qualities and therefore focuses on how we followed after him with only the matzahs on our backs and calls it Chag HaMatzos. And we focus on Hashem's positive qualities that he passed over the Jewish homes and spared the Jewish people. And that's Chag Pesach. That's what Pesach is all about us, about the beauty of the relationship between Klal Yisrael and Hashem, and each one seeing the positive in the other. That's marriage. That's what the kiyor teaches us. This is the lesson of marriage as well, and in general in relationships, and in general how to acquire another. See the positive qualities in others, and certainly see the positive qualities in the most important person in our lives. And this, now just to conclude, this is why we burn the candle in beer chametz. So to conclude, the Sfas Emes says. Well, before I say what the Sfas Emes says, I just want to conclude with a small story that will exemplify the burning of the candle during beer chametz. The Alter Rebbe had the Alter Rebbe was the first Chabad Rebbe, lived in the end of the 18th century, and he had a chassid named Shmuel Munkus, who himself was a great chassid, and he had a shul. And in those days, they would have traveling preachers that would travel from town to town and try to, arouse the Jewish people to do tshuva. And some of them were very fire and brimstone and very musari. And apparently, one such fire and brimstone preacher came to the shul of Shmuel Munkus, the Alter Rebbe's chassid, and he asked him if he could speak to the crowd. Okay, so he speaks to the crowd and he rips into this crowd. He tears into them how horrible they are, how far away they are from Hashem, the punishments that await them in Gehenna, how terrible and despicable they are as Jews, etc., etc., etc.
Like, it's good to have stability, to
They're all literally in a state of total despair. And he sees the whole crowd is crying. He feels okay. He did his job. And he retires to his room to have his little meal before he leaves to the other shul. And the rabbi of the shul, Shmuel Munkus, comes in and he's carrying a large knife and a sharpening block. And he comes in to the rabbi and he's sharpening his knife. And the rabbi is a little bit feel like, what's going on? Why are you sharpening your knife here? And Shmuel Munkus tells him, well, as you could see, as you so berated my congregation, you could see we're a congregation filled with sinners. We have no tzaddikim in our midst. And he's sharpening his knife, and the rabbi says, oh, okay, well, what does that have to do with sharpening the knife? Shmuel Munkus says, well, it's a halacha and Shulchan Aruch that Erev Rosh Hashanah, we have to go to the kivrei tzaddikim, we go to the graves of tzaddikim and daven there. And he's sharpening his knife, and the rabbi says, okay, but what does any of that have to do with sharpening your knife? Shmuel Munkus says, yeah, but the real what it has to do is that we don't have any tzaddikim here. We don't have any tzaddik to go to before Rosh Hashanah. So now the rabbi's getting very nervous and very awkward. And he's like, well, again, why are you sharpening your knife? So Shmuel Munkus tells him, because I came up with a plan. I will shecht you right here. I'll bury you in our shul courtyard. And every Rosh Hashanah, all of us sinners can come and daven by your kever, by your grave. And we'll be able to daven by the kever of a tzaddik before Rosh Hashanah. It's a great plan. And now the rabbi's getting worried. Well, I'm not such a tzaddik. I've actually done a few sins in my life. And the rabbi enumerated a few little sins. Shmuel Munkus tells him, such small sins. That's nothing. You're still a tzaddik compared to the rest of us. And then he enumerated some more gross sins that he had done. Still, says Shmuel Munkus, you're still much greater than the rest of us. I think it's still appropriate to shecht you and bury you here in the shul. And then the rabbi says, listen, let me be honest with you. I've done some really, really terrible sins. And the rabbi confesses some terrible sins he's done. And then Shmuel Munkus puts down the knife and he says, how dare you? You come into this shul, a shul full of simple Jews who try their hardest to connect to Hashem, who spend hours saying Tehillim, who spend their lives being, notwithstanding the work and the pressures of Parnassa, spend their lives devoted to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael, and you berate them while you yourself have more egregious sins than any of them? How dare you? And he says, don't ever come back here and don't ever preach again. And that Maggid was never seen from again. And the people who overheard this asked Shmuel Munkas, how did you know? Was that Ruach HaKodesh? How did you know the rabbi had those sins? How did you know that they existed? And Shmuel Munkas tells them, it wasn't Ruach HaKodesh. You see, it's very simple. When you look at other people and all you see are their flaws and all you see are their negativities, that says much more about you than it does about them. The fact that the preacher could come in here and only see the negativities of this congregation and only see the negatives in everyone here told me that there's much more negativity within him. And he was right. And this is the reason why we burn the candle. Says the Sfas Emes, the entire reason why we burn the candle by Bir Chametz is the candle's entire existence is to find chametz. When you look at others and all you can see is the chametz and all you can see is the negativity, then you yourself are chametz. The candle itself, whose whole existence is to find the negative chametz, the candle itself is symbolically chametz. That's the message of the kiyor. That's the message of Pesach and Chag HaMatzos. That's why we burn the candle right before Chag Pesach. It teaches us we're meant to utilize our eyes and our minds and our intellect to see the beauty and splendor in others. And if all we can see is the negativity, then it says much more about us than it does about anybody else. And this is the underlying theme of Pesach, the unity and the achdus of us and Hashem, and us and each other. And that's why the main ingredient of Pesach is matzah. And what does matzah represent Kabbalistically? Humility, anava, bittul, right? Chametz represents ego. It's inflated. Matzah is deflated. It represents anava and humility. That's what we consume physically because that's what we're meant to imbue spiritually. The bittul, the anivas. And with that humility, we can come together with Hashem and we can come together with each other. And that's what brings redemption. That's the message of Pesach. Thank you so much, everybody. In Mirza Hashem, we should all be zeicha to see the positivity in others, to increase our own anivas, to see the humility in others, to see to have that humility within ourselves, that we see the greatness in others, and through that may we experience real redemption, so that we are zeicha to the Korban Pesach, not just the afikomen at our Seder tables, but the actual Korban Pesach and the Beis HaMikdash Shlishi, Mashiach Tzidkenu, B'meiru Yimenu, Amen. Thank you so much, everybody. Let's say a few kapitlach of
Thank you.
Tehillim. We will say, huh? I did record that. I did. Actually,